I stood outside my sister's wedding, holding an invitation that didn't exist. She looked me in the eye and said, "You really think you'd be invited?" The music started inside, laughter spilling out of the ballroom, and I stood there unwanted, unseen. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just left a small gift behind. Hours later, she found out what was inside. That's when her perfect night turned into a storm of phone calls I never answered. Sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge. And that night, I let it speak for me. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now here's my story. My name is Ethan Ward, and if you've ever been treated like you didn't belong, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with me. Not for me, but for every quiet soul who's ever had to prove their worth without saying a word. It was a Saturday evening in Portland, the kind of rain that doesn't fall but lingers, thin patient, and almost polite. The Hawthorne Grand Hotel gleamed through the mist chandeliers, spilling light onto marble floors as the sound of strings floated from the ballroom upstairs. I stood in line at the check-in desk, the damp collar of my jacket brushing my neck, watching other guests glide past in their black tie confidence. The woman at the counter smiled with professional brightness. "Name, please?" "Ethan Ward," I said. "The bride's brother." Her manicured fingers swiped down the iPad once, then again, slower. Her smile began to stiffen. "I am sorry, sir. Could you spell that I spelled it slow and clear the way you do when you already know what's coming?" She searched again, glanced up at me and swallowed. "I am not seeing it here." Behind me, someone cleared their throat. The line had grown. I reached for my phone, pulled up the confirmation email I'd saved weeks ago. Subject line: wedding RSVP confirmed. I held it out to her. It was sent April 15th. One guest. She leaned forward, looked, then hesitated. "Would you mind stepping aside? I'll call the coordinator." I stepped away. Couples drifted past me, silk and perfume and champagne laughter. The lobby smelled like lilies and expensive cologne. I felt no anger, just a steady clarity settling in. I dialed Caroline. She answered on the third ring, breathless laughter and chatter echoing behind her. "Ethan, what is it I am walking in 30 minutes? They can't find my name on the list." A pause, not confusion, calculation. "Oh," she said finally, her tone dropping an octave. Businesslike. "Now that Ethan, please. You really think you'd be invited?" Her words hit like cold water down my spine. "You sent me an invitation." That was before Andrew's investors confirmed. "You know who's here tonight? Partners from Silicon Ridge Road. The VP of Rockwell Capital. The people who decide what our future looks like. I can't have my unemployed brother wandering around talking about his little side hustle." Side hustle. I kept my voice even. "I have been in real estate for 8 years. Exactly. Selling homes isn't a career, Ethan. Not in our world. Our world. As if I'd ever belonged to hers." "I understand perfectly," I said finally. "Good. I knew you would." I ended the call. My hands were steady. From my jacket, I took out the cream-colored envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. I borrowed a pen from the front desk and wrote in my neatest hand, "For the bride." After the ceremony, timing matters. When the wedding coordinator approached, flustered and apologetic, I smiled. "Please give this to her," I said during the reception. "She'll want to open it then." I turned away before the woman could respond. The rain was heavier now, blurring the city lights into gold smears on wet pavement. My phone buzzed once. "Mom, where are you?" "Ceremony starting soon." I didn't answer. I stepped outside, raised my collar, and let the rain fall on my face. Behind me, faint music slipped through the revolving doors. It wasn't a shock, just confirmation of something I'd known for years. and my family's success was a costume. Tonight I'd finally stopped pretending to wear it. As I walked down the sidewalk, I caught my reflection in the glass window of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, a dark outline vanishing as the doors spun closed. Some seats aren't worth fighting for, I thought. Some doors deserve to be closed from your side. And as I turned away, I whispered into the rain. Tonight I am not asking for a place at their table. I'll let the truth choose its own audience. If you want to understand how a man ends up standing outside his sister's wedding, you have to start in Lake Oswego at the house by the lake where image mattered more than anything else. Every Christmas, our family gathered in the same dining room, long oak table, 12 chairs, silverware polished until it gleamed. My mother ruled those dinners the way generals rule armies. She'd steer every conversation toward Caroline and Andrew, the clients she'd landed, the investors circling his company. The rest of us were an audience applauding their perfection. That year, when I mentioned a waterfront development, I'd helped broker a complex deal involving 3 independent investors. She smiled faintly and asked, "Was that one of those 2-bedroom condos you sell?" The room chuckled. I smiled back, tore a piece of bread, and wrote a few figures on my napkin just to keep my hands busy. They thought it was doodling. It was a projection of next quarter's market curve. When dinner ended, my father followed me out to the porch, the air crisp, off Oswego Lake. He offered me a drink, the kind of gesture men use when they want to talk, but not too much. "Your mother means well," he said. "You know how she is about appearances. Maybe you could ask Caroline to help you get into Andrew's company. Marketing finance, something steady." I looked at the dark water reflecting the house lights. "I don't need a favor," I said. "I just need space to work." He nodded, not understanding, but trying to. My father wasn't cruel. He was simply fluent in the only language our family spoke: status. Back then, I'd already left corporate finance. Too much politics, too little purpose. I'd started over in real estate, working from a small apartment in Nob Hill with peeling paint and a desk that wobbled. I spent mornings poring over spreadsheets and zoning maps, building a quiet network of private clients who wanted precision, not flash. I learned to say less. People equated silence with weakness. I let them because when you talk in the wrong room, the right people stop listening. The truth was, I'd become good at what I did, better than they'd ever imagine. But better doesn't count in a house where success is measured in applause. That night after Christmas dinner, I washed the dishes alone. The others were still laughing in the living room, glasses clinking. My phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands and looked. Subject: interview invitation. Rockwell Capital Partners. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. I didn't smile. I just felt a steady warmth settle in my chest. 6 months earlier, I'd sent a cold email to one of their partners, never expecting a reply. Now they wanted me for a second-round interview. In the next room, Caroline's voice rose above the laughter, telling some story about an investor who'd called her a natural leader. I turned off the faucet and listened for a moment, then dried my hands. I didn't say a word about the email. I didn't need to. That night, I wrote a note to myself on the back of the invitation printout. They don't hear me now. Let my results speak instead. The rain outside tapped the kitchen window, a quiet rhythm like agreement. And that's when I began to understand the difference between being ignored and being underestimated. One wounds your pride, the other builds your patience. Patience was something I was starting to master. The email arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where Portland felt suspended between mist and silence. I'd been up since dawn, coffee gone cold beside my laptop, running through one more set of market models. My inbox chimed. Subject line: offer Rockwell Capital Partners. I opened it, read it once, then again, just to make sure the words were real. Senior Vice President, Real Estate Acquisitions, West Coast Division. A $600 million portfolio, base salary, equity, performance, bonus, relocation package numbers that didn't seem to belong to the version of me my family had written off years ago. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the cracked ceiling of my Nob Hill apartment. The radiator hummed. The city outside was still waking up a soundless symphony of traffic and rain. I didn't shout or call anyone. I just exhaled. I wasn't leaving Portland yet. Not before finishing one last thing. During the interviews, they'd tested everything. Valuation models, risk tolerance, even emotional composure. One partner had thrown a question about yield compression and debt cycles in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland. I'd countered without blinking. Cash flow health depends on function, not location. Repositioning usage creates yield, not chasing geography. Michael Trent. The last interviewer had smiled faintly. You don't talk much, Ward, but your data does. I let the market speak for me, I said. Now, sitting there with the offer in hand, I realized the market had finally spoken. That afternoon, I opened a listing I'd saved months ago, a penthouse on Laurelhurst Heights. 3 bedrooms, wraparound terrace, glass walls overlooking the Willamette riverfront. Caroline had dragged me there once years earlier, her heels clicking across the marble floors as she took selfies by the windows. When Andrew's company goes public, she'd said this will be our first home. The view screamed success. Back then, I'd smiled politely. Now the same unit was listed again, the owner, mid-divorce and desperate to sell. I called the agent, offered full price, cash 30-day, close no contingencies. When the papers were signed, they handed me a small box lined in dark velvet. Inside, 3 identical keys rested side by side. I held them in my palm, cool and heavy, the way decisions feel when they can't be undone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table drafting a speech for the wedding. Tonight isn't about money, I wrote. It's about second chances, about believing in someone, even when they stop believing in you. The plan was simple gift. Her the penthouse publicly settle years of tension in one graceful gesture. It wasn't forgiveness, it was release. But even as I practiced the words, another thought kept surfacing, one quieter, sharper. On the same desk sat a manila folder marked Portland Women's Haven donation packet. I'd prepared it weeks ago, half instinct, half insurance. One signature and the penthouse would fund a program for women rebuilding their lives. I opened my safe, placed 2 envelopes inside, one labeled Toast, the other Transfer. I stared at them side by side like twin paths diverging from a single choice. I didn't know which one I'd use yet. Maybe I did. Outside, the city was blanketed in fog. Somewhere beyond it, my sister was rehearsing her vows, picturing a perfect life she thought I didn't understand. She'd learn soon enough that not every kind of success needs an audience. I closed the safe, turned off the light, and whispered to the dark. They won't see I have changed because I talk differently. They'll see it when I put the key in the right hands or take it back. The night of the wedding glowed like a magazine spread. Inside the grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, the chandeliers dripped gold light over crystal glasses and white roses. Outside, Portland shimmered beneath a fine drizzle, the streets glistening like ink. I was 3 blocks away, sitting at a small Italian place by the window, a glass of Chianti in front of me, watching the hotel through the rain-streaked glass. I knew the exact moment it would happen. The envelope had reached her hands. I could almost see her face as she opened it, the practiced smile, the expectation of a check or an apology. She would have laughed softly, maybe shown it to Andrew first. I remembered the words I'd written inside. I planned to hand you the keys to your dream home. But since I wasn't worthy to attend, the Laurelhurst Heights penthouse will be donated to the Portland Women's Haven in your name. The handwriting was clean, small, unshaking. No exclamation marks, no anger, just precision. Later, Rachel, my cousin who'd been there, told me what happened next. Caroline read the note, still smiling, then pulled out my business card tucked behind it. She stared at the logo for a moment, not recognizing it, but someone else did. One of the investors from Silicon Ridge Road leaned closer, murmured something to Andrew, and pulled out his phone. In less than 2 minutes, the ballroom was a constellation of glowing screens. My name, my title, my face. Senior Vice President, Rockwell, Capital Partners, West Coast Division. The murmurs spread like ripples across the champagne haze. No one spoke above a whisper. The band's jazz faltered. The hum of Prestige cracked. Caroline's laughter thinned into silence. She looked at the card again, lips moving but no sound. Someone near her said, "That's him. I have met him. He ran our portfolio last year." According to Rachel, she just stood there, pale, shaking her head, repeating, "This can't be real." Across town, I was twirling a fork full of pasta when my phone started to vibrate. Once, twice, then over and over, a relentless pulse against the table. I didn't need to look. I knew. Caroline first, then Mom, then Andrew. I imagined the chaos, the guest staring her perfect fad collapsing in front of every person she'd wanted to impress. I turned the phone face down. The vibrations made it tremble across the table light flashing against the red wine. The waiter glanced over. "Everything all right, sir?" "Perfect," I said. And for the first time in my life, it was true. 47 missed calls, 23 messages. I didn't answer a single one. Each vibration felt less like vengeance and more like release, like air escaping a long-sealed room. For years, they'd mistaken my silence for weakness. Tonight, that silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. I sat there until the phone went still, until the noise from the restaurant faded into the soft rhythm of rain against the window. I drained the last of my wine, left a tip, and stepped outside. The city lights shimmered in puddles at my feet. From here, the Hawthorne Grand Hotel's upper windows glowed faintly, a distant constellation of people still trying to understand how their story had just come undone. I walked toward the corner, hands in my pockets, the rain washing the last of the tension from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten son of Lake Oswego. I felt free, untethered from the version of me they'd invented, uninvited from their world, but finally at home in my own. Somewhere behind those glowing windows, Caroline was learning the same lesson I'd learned long ago. The most painful way to be seen is after you've erased someone who was watching quietly all along. I crossed the street, the rain soft on my face, and kept walking until the hotel lights disappeared behind the blur of the city. 3 days after the wedding, my father called. His voice carried the weight of command wrapped in guilt. "Ethan," he said, "the family needs to talk." That night I drove back to the Oswego estate, the house that had hosted more silent dinners than conversations. The rain followed me down the highway, soft and relentless, as if it had something to mourn. The lights of the estate glowed through the trees like an interrogation room. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of old wine and tension. My mother sat rigid on the couch, a glass of untouched Merlot beside her. My father stood by the window, his hands behind his back. Caroline was in the center of the room, eyes red, makeup washed off. "Sit down," my mother said. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed. "You've embarrassed this family, Ethan. You humiliated your sister in front of investors, colleagues, our entire network." I sat across from them. "No," I said. "I just refuse to be humiliated one more time." Caroline looked up, voice trembling. "You could have talked to me privately. You didn't have to make a spectacle of it." I met her eyes. "You erased my name publicly, Caroline. The least you can do is accept the consequences publicly." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. My mother glanced at my father, waiting for him to step in. He didn't. "Rachel." My cousin leaned against the fireplace. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Caroline, You told me yourself he didn't fit your image. Those were your words. Now look at that image. What's left of it? No one breathed for a full 5 seconds. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to hesitate. Finally, my father spoke. Why didn't you tell us about Rockwell? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, I said quietly, you only heard Caroline's version of success. He flinched just slightly. My mother's jaw tightened. The conversation spiraled after that. Someone, probably Andrew's father, had leaked what happened at the wedding to the business circle. Within 48 hours, 2 of his major investors withdrew from their Series B funding round. The reason stated in the email was precise concern about judgment and family representation. Caroline broke down, tears streaking her face. You've ruined my life, she said. I shook my head. No. You did that when you decided other people's approval was worth more than your family. The argument stretched for an hour, accusations, excuses, the same chorus of pride and pretense. My mother kept insisting, we must preserve our family's reputation. I stood buttoning my coat. Then preserve it, I said. But I am not part of that performance anymore. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me, softer now. Ethan, she's your sister. I turned back. That used to mean something. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night air carried the smell of wet cedar and endings. I drove back toward Portland, the window half open, wind cutting through the remnants of their voices. My phone lit up again. Caroline's name for the 80th time since the wedding night. I let it ring until the silence returned. By the time I reached the city, I knew that would be the last time she called. Some relationships die not in anger, but in exhaustion. Thursday morning, the world looked clean again. The sky over the river stretched clear and blue, the kind of rare light Chicago only offers after days of haze. From my office on the 42nd floor of the Rockwell Tower, I watched ships crawl across the Willamette riverfront like small, patient ideas. The meeting room was full analysts, partners, market projections on every screen. My personal phone vibrated, a name flashing that I hadn't seen in days. Caroline. I almost ignored it, but something in me said this would be the last time she tried. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Her voice was horse-thin. Ethan, did you buy the apartment on Laurelhurst Heights? Yes. The one I showed you years ago. That was my place. You knew that. I did, I said. I was going to give it to you. On your wedding day. She said nothing for a long time, just a small, broken sound breathing maybe disbelief. I don't understand, she whispered. I know I said, you don't have to. I told her about the document signed 2 days earlier, how the penthouse had been transferred to the Portland Women's Haven. How the board approved its conversion into housing for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. They named it the Ward Residence, I said. You can look it up. Her breath caught. You did that to get revenge. No, I said. I did it to end the story. There was another pause, longer this time. The kind where words have nowhere to land. Ethan, she said softly. I am sorry. I believe you, I said. But apologies don't undo the pattern that made them necessary. The call ended at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I stared at my reflection in the glass, same face, different weight behind the eyes. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. That afternoon, Angela Rivera, the director of the shelter, came to meet me. She was small, with silver hair pulled tight and eyes that missed nothing. She brought a folder of papers and a quiet gratitude that felt more real than any thank you card I'd ever received. That home will change lives, she said. You know, some of the women we help were disowned by their families. One told me yesterday, they erased me from their story. And now, because of you, she has somewhere to start again. I didn't answer. I just signed the last page and wrote in the corner donation to be made in the bride's name. When Angela left, the sun had dipped low enough to turn the entire city gold. Light spilled through the window, bouncing off the conference table, catching in the steam from my untouched coffee. For a moment, I let myself stand there and breathe. The phone buzzed again, Andrew this time. His name glowed bright against the dark screen. I watched it ring, imagining the words waiting behind it. Excuses, negotiations, maybe threats. Then I deleted the call before it could finish. Some conversations don't need to happen. The message had already been delivered. Outside, the city was alive with movement and noise, but I felt still anchored. The world it'd been shut out of was collapsing under its own illusions, and the one id built in silence was finally standing tall. I walked out of the office, coat over my arm, the air sharp with salt from the Willamette riverfront. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection one last time. Steady, unhurried, uninvited no longer. Some doors once closed don't need to open again. A week later, I was in my office reviewing a new set of investment proposals when the receptionist's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Ward, there's a woman in the lobby. Caroline Ward. She says she's your sister." For a long moment, I didn't answer. I turned toward the security monitor. There she was, standing at the marble counter downstairs in a pale gray suit, clutching her handbag as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The same sister who once said I didn't belong in her world now stood in mine, smaller than I remembered, lost under the bright lobby lights. "Keep her there," I said quietly. "I'll handle it." Before I walked away from my desk, I clicked send on an email draft already waiting in my outbox. It was short, measured, and final. "Boundaries are clarity, not cruelty. You made your choice at the Hawthorne Grand Hotel. This is mine. Please don't come again." On the monitor, I watched her phone vibrate. She opened the message, read, and froze. A moment later, she looked up toward the cameras as if searching for me. Her shoulders trembled. Then she turned and walked out into the street. I stayed still, hand resting on the back of my chair. There was no satisfaction in it, only quiet confirmation. That afternoon, a headline circulated through industry chat boards. Aurelius Group faces investor withdrawals following public controversy. Two of their biggest backers had pulled all funding, citing reputational concerns. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. That evening, an email from the Wall Street Journal landed in my inbox. They wanted to feature me in a series called Young Leaders in Real Estate. I hesitated, then agreed on one condition. No talk of family, no personal history. When the article was published a week later, the title stopped me cold. The Quiet Power Broker, Ethan Ward, and the Art of Building Without Noise. I read the final paragraph twice. Success isn't who sits at your table. It's who you no longer need to impress. I closed the magazine and stepped out onto the balcony of the 42nd floor. The wind from the Willamette riverfront was sharp, the city lights flickering below like scattered glass. For the first time, Chicago didn't feel foreign. It felt earned. The house it left behind in Lake Oswego now seemed smaller, its walls too tight to contain what had become. Everything they had once taken, validation, dignity, belonging, I had reclaimed, but not through volume or vengeance. I had done it by being silent at the exact right time. 10 months after the wedding, winter sunlight spilled through the tall glass of my new office on the 53rd floor. My nameplate read Ethan Ward, Executive Vice President. Below it, a framed photo of Laurelhurst Heights hung on the wall, a reminder of where the story had begun and ended. My assistant knocked softly. "This came for you," she said, setting down a brown envelope, handwritten return address, Caroline Ward. I didn't open it immediately. I placed it to the side and finished the morning's meeting. By noon, the room was empty, the city quiet beneath a pale sky. I tore the seal. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, careful but uncertain. Ethan. A year ago, I erased your name because I thought success had to be protected by image. Now I know image can't save anyone. I have lost the apartment part of my career and the brother I thought I'd always have. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally understand that worth isn't about being invited. It's about how we treat the ones we left outside the door. Caroline. I read it twice. No anger rose, no triumph, only calm. The ache had long been replaced by distance. I wasn't angry anymore because anger requires you to keep caring about the outcome. The phone on my desk rang Angela Rivera from the Portland Women's Haven. She was in the lobby asking to see me. When she entered, she carried a folder thick with documents and smiled through tears. "The Laurelhurst Heights penthouse has been sold," she said. "Market value went up. We received $3.5 million. That will keep our programs running for 7 years. 50 women have already found stable housing. Half of them are working again." I stared at her, unable to speak. "Do they know my name?" I asked finally. She shook her head. "No. They just know it's called the Ward Residence." They thanked the person who didn't forget them. When she left, I turned toward the window. The skyline shimmered in late afternoon gold. The signed donation certificate hung framed beside the door, proof not of generosity but of integrity reclaimed. I opened my desk drawer and placed Caroline's letter inside next to the donation papers. Not out of resentment, but respect. It belonged there, part of the record of what I'd learned. You can win without destroying anyone. Rain began tapping the glass. The light reflected off the water below, scattering into shapes that looked almost like envelopes drifting through the city. Everything I'd ever needed to say had already been said in silence. Exactly 1 year after the wedding, I flew back to Portland for a new Rockwell Capital project, an expansion fund for community housing. The car took me through familiar streets, now changed by time and distance. When we passed Laurelhurst Heights, I asked the driver to stop. There it was. The building gleamed white under a soft drizzle, a small brass plaque on the gate. The Ward Residence, Transitional Housing Program. The security guard at the entrance nodded politely, recognizing the name on my badge but asking nothing. I stood there for a while, watching the windows glow with warm light. From the courtyard came the sound of laughter, children playing, women talking softly. A young woman stepped out onto the porch and smiled. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, thank you. I just knew the previous owner." When I turned back toward the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel Carolines back at work. She moved to Selwood, volunteers at the shelter sometimes. I read it twice, then replied, "Good for her." That evening I sat in a small cafe overlooking the Willamette riverfront. The rain drummed gently on the awning. The smell of coffee salt and wet concrete blended into something oddly comforting. I watched people coming and going, their reflections smearing across the glass. For the first time, I allowed myself to remember that night at the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, the humiliation, the sting of being told I didn't belong. Then I realized I wouldn't change a thing. That moment had been the invitation I didn't know I needed. Outside, the city was alive with sound, but inside, everything was still. Later, back at the hotel, I reviewed the draft for Rockwell's new community initiative. On the list of partner organizations, one name stood out: Portland Women's Haven. I smiled and typed a note to my assistant. "Prioritize this fund. Keep my name off the press release. Some victories don't need to be seen." When I left the cafe that night, the rain returned in thin silver lines. I paused at the curb, watching the lights shimmer across the wet pavement. The day Caroline removed my name, I thought I'd lost everything. But that was the day I was invited to a far better table, the one where peace was the only guest. I walked into the rain, letting it blur the city around me until all that remained was light and silence. There was no music, no audience, just the sound of my own footsteps fading into the night. And that finally was enough. There are stories that end with noise, applause, confrontation, vindication, and then there are stories like this one where the final sound is silence. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what that night at the Hawthorne Grand Hotel really gave me. On the surface, it stripped me of something, a seat, a name, a sense of belonging. But in the echo that followed, I heard something else, the sound of a boundary forming, of dignity rebuilding itself without permission. That was the moment I stopped chasing inclusion and started choosing peace. Every person who's ever been left out of a room knows that unique ache, the disbelief of being erased by people you once trusted to remember you. We spend so much time trying to prove our worth to those who wrote us off, thinking if we just succeed loud enough, they'll see us again. But I learned that recognition from the wrong crowd is just another form of dependence. The moment I stopped performing for their approval, I started to become someone I actually respected. Forgiveness didn't arrive as a grand act. It came slowly in the spaces between success and solitude, in mornings when I looked out from my office window and realized I didn't have to explain myself anymore. It came in the faces of strangers who found refuge in that house on Laurelhurst Heights, women who would never know my name, but somehow carried my story forward in their survival. And it came in that letter from Caroline, shaky and honest, proving that even broken bridges can cast light when you stop trying to walk across them. If you've ever been made to feel small, if someone once told you that your silence meant insignificance, let this be a reminder: silence can be power. It's not about staying quiet forever. It's about choosing when to speak, and knowing your worth doesn't need to be proven in their language. You can leave the room, build your own, and invite in only those who see you for who you are, not who you serve to their comfort. I don't hate Caroline anymore. I don't resent the family dinners that turned into auditions for affection. I don't regret the rain outside the hotel that night, because without all of it, I wouldn't have learned the most valuable truth. Sometimes the cost of peace is letting go of the version of love that demands your silence. So wherever you are reading this from, maybe in a quiet apartment, maybe scrolling through stories while wondering if your own voice still matters, remember this: you don't need their invitation to start again. The door you build for yourself will always open wider than the one that closed.